Alright, another physics video. Yeah, whatever. I just didn't get any sleep, and just, a lot of stuff in my head, and so then I watched these other videos, and it just, just like screams that you gotta say something. So I guess I'll make this a series, and I'll try to be as gentle as possible, because I like David, but, dissident science, but his rhetoric has just gotten so cheap. His arguments are completely empty and irrational in terms of the whole amount of evidence that exists. You can't just dismiss it with these cheap dismissals. I mean, it's just... So anyway, this really comes down to the, in our conversations that we had, I was always quite disturbed by this kind of idea that you can do both things. That we can attack conventional physics and then pretend to have some sort of respect for each other's models or theories, and somehow we all agree that our models are somehow better than the conventional model, when rationality tells you most of the models that we have, the dissidents, have to be wrong by logic alone, because they're so different, the models, they can't all be right, and they might all be wrong. And especially the ones that are just as poorly fact-based, just as thinly evidence-based as the conventional theory we're supposed to be first attacking. So I just say, you have to kind of separate these two arguments. And it's sort of illustrated in the last video, because Hothliday's reaction is as if when I made a couple of videos on electromagnetism and proposing that there is no electric field, there's just a magnetic field, I was making the argument from my theory. I was pointing out how my theory states this. And I wasn't so much attacking conventional physics or the physics models they have. I was just pointing out how this model works. And if you understand electrons and protons as the magnetic monopole, you're perfectly capable of explaining electricity and magnetism. So I wasn't attacking his theory. I was defending my theory, yet he responded as if the point of my argument was to attack the current theory, and it was to defend the fact that there's another model that works. And so, but this is the problem, mixing these two things, because there's a time to say, like with Einstein's lensing, there's not enough evidence. The evidence is contradictory, to point out that the conventional knowledge is weak. And then you have the whole Copenhagen and many worlds and lots of interpretations built on one flimsy experiment, the two-slit experiment. Completely bizarre extrapolations based on an understanding or an interpretation of an experiment that could be completely wrong, and yet there's all these branches of new religion floating out of it. Whole new philosophies of multidimensionality, like Einstein's bent space-time. No physical evidence of this time part being bent. There's just physical evidence of velocity having something to do with clocks breaking. And the rest is all just theory, and they all build really solid buildings on top of that theory. Just like black holes colliding in space and converting mass into gravity waves. It's all based on this thin little interpretation of a single a little signal. A little bit of noise in an interferometer. What if that interpretation is wrong? They're building this whole edifice, this whole theory of physics, based on that flimsy evidence. So I've made the argument that yes, conventional physics ought to at least admit that many branches of its physics are based on really thin evidenced assumptions. They're just that, assumptions. They're not proven. They're not even presumptions, in the sense that they're not even intuitively sensible, and that's worthy of note and worthy of accepting as a problem, not erasing and pretending it doesn't exist, and that maybe there's a better explanation. But they're not even open to that idea of a better explanation, because they have built so many platforms on top of these theoretical notions, and they have whole edifices built, and they don't want to tear down those buildings and rebuild them somewhere else, because that's embarrassing, essentially. So me and David have a common purpose. In the sense we both think physics has got its horses way ahead of got its cart way ahead of the horse. They've jumped the evidence. Like jumping the shark, that's the worst thing you can do in physics or science, is to jump your evidence. And they have jumped the evidence. All right, way ahead of the evidence. And that's a rational critique that physicists have to be challenged by, and it's a fair challenge, and it needs to be done by people. But I really can't do it with a guy who talks like this because he's using their same rhetoric, he's using their same tactics to promote his own garbage. So I'm trying to get rid of garbage, unevidenced speculation as proof, and he's doing the same thing. He's just selling another bad cabbage. I don't need to replace bad physics with bad physics. And you can just, in this video, it's just so clear. He's just using these cheap arguments, just rhetoric. There's no depth to it. And it's just so obnoxiously, well, look, we've completely proven that it can't possibly be this or it can't possibly be that. And it has no proof of these things. So it's just like when they talk about I'm not going to remember the name again. It's tough to keep all of these. I'm always bad at names, but you know, to keep all the names in my head. But the what the hell is that called? This equalization principle, the something principle. Anyway, it has to do with probabilities, and you know, the fact that they've proven true entanglement. Like they've somehow have eliminated the idea of left and right gloves. Like photons are created left and right. They've somehow proven that doesn't exist because they've done these statistical experiments that couldn't possibly happen probabilistically because their percentages are wrong. And again, it's based on assumptions, like somehow they know that their measurement techniques are actually capable of measuring gloves accurately, you know, in terms of what the probabilities are. And I've explained, especially in polarization, like polarization experiments, there is this assumption that the polarizing film is 50-50, when, as I've explained, if I'm throwing frisbees at a jail cell, the frisbees I do throw, you know, vertically, that should all go through the jail bars. Some percentage of the ones going the right way don't go through, when all of the ones going the wrong way, thrown flat, don't get through. And so if they have a wrong assumption, the entire edifice they build on it, the whole building they build on an edifice, it's a building. The foundation they build on this bad, you know, it's a bad foundation, and they shouldn't be building on it, especially not aggressively. All right. So yeah, but this just doesn't work for me. You know, this idea that it doesn't matter what the model is, it just has to be anti the model that exists. So make up any religion, any cartoon belief system, and call God Joe, you know, and Fred and Homer Simpson. You know, they would be the, you know, the God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost. You know, make up any kind of bullshit. Make up any fable, and somehow we should respect it because it's anti the existing fable. I mean, that's just garbage.
It's the cork, or some other one.
So I started this midway, just as the beginning was just blah blah blah, getting to the point, and then he starts making these assertions that there's some reason to doubt the possibility that there could be a theory in physics that explains it as being one thing with just two polarizations, and that everything's made out of that one thing with two polarizations. When, yeah, that does work, retard. Sorry to be offensive, but you're just being so dismissive, as if you've thought of all the possibilities. When did you do that? When did you consider all the possible scenarios and dismiss them all through some sort of rational process? No, you never did that. You're just talking out of your ass. Sorry, but that's what you're doing.
It's going to have magical powers too. Otherwise, what you have is like a sea of neutrinos, which they think, you know, exist neutrinos, but if they do exist, and they're flying all around, the whole universe is going to end up in a big soup of neutrinos that just fly around.
So that's his statement, like as if the physicists don't have an explanation for why the neutrinos don't take over the entire universe and blow everything up. I'm sure they have an explanation for why they don't. So again, he just makes these statements. So he's going to, he says, I hope that part's in here where he starts talking about infinite density, as if somebody's actually proposing the idea of an infinitely dense particle. It's a silly distortion. Physics isn't arguing there's an infinitely dense particle.
But if you have an ultimate particle, meaning the entire universe is based on that particle, you've got to have it have magical powers, which you have to assume.
Oh yeah, magical powers like it flies this way or it flies that way. Just a difference. All you need is one difference. One difference is all you need. One goes the speed of light and one goes half the speed of light. All you need is one difference to create a whole bunch of complexity. So it's just a silly notion that they have to be magical properties. They can be really simple differences. Square versus round. Simple differences could create a lot of complexity.
It has. Okay? There's no doubt about it. You can have a magical shape.
There's no doubt about what. There's doubt about all of it. And it has to be rationally argued, not with this cheap frickin' garbage rhetoric of making emphatic statements about what's possible and what's impossible. That's just not scientific, because you don't know what's possible.
To it, magically, it's this shape, and it has these characteristics. It's all made of this thing, but it's the last one. There's nothing below it. You got some problems. Let me tell you another.
No, there's no problem. Okay, so again, he's imposing this notion that somehow you have to make something infinitely smaller and smaller. You have to create a fractal to create an image. Everything's not a fractal. There can be just blobs of paint. No fractals involved. And pattern can be constructed. No fractals necessary.
The problem with the ultimate particle.
I mean, there was an artist who did that. Little tiny dots of color. And created whole beautiful paintings with just little tiny dots of color.
The God particle is infinitely dense.
Alright, I've never even heard that. It makes no sense. It just sounds like a bullshit assertion that physics is never going to make. Infinitely dense. You mean as dense as lead can be, or as dense as atoms can be compressed? There's no such thing as infinite density. That's almost an infinity like you're talking about. How do you have infinite density without having infinite regression or size reduction? So where is this argument being made? You could at least cite a reference where physics is asserting, conventional physics, most physicists on Earth right now assert that there's a particle that has infinite density. You could in some way prove your accusation, prove these straw man bullshit words you put in their mouth. You think this is a reasonable tactic in an argument to straw man physics like this?
Here is a thought experiment. Michael D. Hilscher, my brother, please forgive me, because I'm not going to make graphics for this. But the idea is, here's the ultimate particle. Let's say this is it. Okay, this globe. Very, very valuable globe, actually. And we are going to shrink...
Piece of slop, in my opinion, but whatever.
Shrink ourselves down, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Well, we can't get smaller than the infinitely small particle, the smallest particle. So we just said this is the foundational elemental particle. Why would I shrink myself smaller than the smallest thing that anything could be made out of? Does that have any logical continuity at all? No, zero. And clearly, if the universe was just made of one thing, all identical, banging into each other, yeah, there won't be any complexity. There has to be something different about the elemental particles. There has to be a distinction, a polarization, like electrons and protons, like photons, and the counterforce would be but there's no exact opposite to a photon, because protons don't release the same kind of energy and we can't possibly see it because it doesn't move electrons, it moves protons. But regardless, the ultimate particle is the element that creates gravity, magnetism, electricity, and the nuclear forces. That elemental particle comes in two flavors, and the two flavors affect protons and electrons differently. Now, that's all the diversity you need to create a very complex universe.
If this is made of parts, we'll eventually get...
The whole point of you saying this is their theory, there's an ultimate particle, why would it be made of parts? It's a discrete, consistent bit with consistent properties. It doesn't go down anywhere. It's just made out of mayonnaise or bologna or frog eye. It doesn't matter what you make it out of. It's just that stuff, and it has properties of motion and momentum and mass. Period.
To the point, well, we'll find a hole. If it's made of parts, it's a hole.
Well, again, why would the ultimate particle be made of parts? Why? It doesn't make any sense. There's no point. See, you're just strawmanning the argument. You're saying somebody has a theory of an ultimate particle, and they're not accounting for the fact that it's made of parts. No, the whole point of the ultimate particle is it's not made out of parts. It's the smallest piece. It's the atom in 1,000-year-old rhetoric.
You mean the parts are infinitely dense too? No, it doesn't make sense. This is the ultimate particle. There should be no holes. It should be right here. It may be a funny shape, whatever, but you can't go smaller.
Yeah, oh, it may be a funny shape, but whatever. Well, I guess if its shape can be different, then again, its performance or behavior will be different.
Small find a hole, because if it's a hole, then it's made of something because of the ultimate particle. That's, you're not going to find a hole. If you're not going to find a hole, it's infinitely dense. If it's infinitely dense, uh-oh.
Well, again, where was this argument ever made in the history of mankind? I've never heard anyone say the words infinitely dense particle. I've never heard the phrase before, and yet you're putting it in physics, as all physicists, or the majority of physicists, somehow are advocating for this infinite density particle theory. I don't think so.
It's pretty heavy. Infinite is heavy. Put it mildly. This is a problem you have to think about.
No, it's a made-up pile of crap that nobody should have to think about. Nobody should have to waste time explaining to you that this is a bullshit argument.
And these are things that, in my opinion and other people's opinion, who believe in what I'm going to talk about shortly next.
Well, again, you say it's in these other people's opinions, but none of the people you consider to be your friends agree with your theory. So, and I'm sure they're just saying, okay, well, yeah, we have to do this let's be friends thing so we can try to get some views and try to get some sort of notice and get involved in an argument and thumb up each other's videos or whatever the gameplay is. But this isn't doing good physics. This is just garbage.
Well, next is that if you assume there's an ultimate particle, it's going to be infinitely dense and it's going to be mad.
Okay, so again, you just said it. If you theorize, it's not assuming that there's a fundamental particle, an elemental bit, which is not a crazy theory. There's only really two choices, and people are allowed to choose the one you didn't choose, which is infinite bullshit. So yes, if you choose the other side, which is no, everything's not made of another universe, and there isn't a universe inside of that, there's not a universe inside of that, it's not Horton here's a who all the way down. If they choose the rational thing and say, no, we know these things are pretty consistent, all electrons are electrons, all photons are photons, or photons are photons, they do the same things, their properties are consistent, they're not different universes full of different bullshit. Hoobies and no hoobies.
Now, critical thinkers out. The reason you're on this channel is because you don't believe in that, and I don't either. So what? So
you don't believe in what? So he just strawmanned physics into advocating for an elemental particle theory, which they don't even do. So again, what? It's not even their theory. He's just putting complete mush. He's rewriting the Bible and says, well, the Bible says the 3 bears eat porridge. No, the Bible doesn't say that.
Are people outside the mainstream thinking about? Well, one of them is Infinity to the rescue! Dr. Glenn Borkert, who is literally the infinity guru.
Yes, you're all gurus, which is just another word for religious kook, so I don't even think that's a great idea. You know, like you're somehow inspired to, you've seen, you know, you've been to the nirvana and, you know, somehow you know how to access it or something. Like you've got something, you know, some special vision. You got your third fucking eye looking at the world. Yeah, bullshit.
Says he's working on, he's working in silence, but he should be launching his YouTube channel really soon. He's actually got his channel there. You can subscribe ahead of time to it, and I would look on my channel, my homepage on the channel over there. You can see recommendations.
Yeah, why don't you go through a list? Why don't you make a list of the things where infinity would create problems and you have wonderful explanations? Like the fact that you would have to make the speed of the elemental bits very, very fast, and you know, once you start squaring the speed of light, you're pretty much just talking about instantaneous action. And why isn't there any evidence of this instantaneous action? I mean, real evidence.
I have Mr. Dr. Infinity, Mr. Infinity, Infinity Guru. That's what comes to the rescue. The answer is, there is no ultimate particle. For things to organize, something this big, if it's traveling like this, and all of a sudden it looks like it's going like this.
Alright, so he just talked about this as the ultimate particle, and it looks like it turns. Now, he made a video called a movie called Einstein Wrong. In that very movie, he presents an argument that lensing evidence is bullshit. That there is no bending of light. That it's all scatter, created by the corona. And that's it. That there's no real lensing by our sun of photons. He makes the argument. He shows the professor saying it. And now he's talking about the ultimate particle bending. So without lensing evidence, what evidence do you have that photons bend? The only evidence would be something like the 2-slit experiment. And again, that can be understood as not light being bent, but light crashing into electrons and leaving at a new trajectory, which that's Feynman physics. Feynman will explain the fact that that happens, that the trajectory of the light changes when it interacts with an electron. So, you know, this is just hypocrisy to talk about bending photons. What's 99% of the evidence is that photons go from point A to point B in a dead straight line. They don't curve or bend. So why does a particle model have to explain bending photons, bending elemental particles, when there's no evidence that this elemental particle ever gets bent? There's no evidence that the sunlight doesn't come to us in straight rays. There's no evidence that the straight rays coming off a magnet don't stay straight. There's no evidence that the straight rays moving between electrons and protons don't keep going straight. No evidence of bending. Yet you you assert it as, how do you explain the bending? I don't have to explain it because there's no evidence of it.
It's not because it's doing that magically.
It's not doing it.
In the universe that causes it to curve. Let's say these are
wrong
particles. Let's say it's a gravity particle.
Yeah, a gravity particle bending. Why don't you show me evidence of a gravity particle bending? Go ahead. Show me where, in some circumstance, gravity bends around corners or something. Show me where gravity is bent somewhere. Show me the evidence for gravity being bent.
Particle that causes gravity, it's going to come in and make something push. It's going like this, but all of a sudden it may turn. Then
show me.
It's not light bend.
Show somebody. Show it somewhere. So show it. Show this bending elemental force particle. Show me a photon actually bending. Not hitting something. Bending.
Gravity bends light. No, I'm not talking about this. Just like particles. Particle. For this particle to turn, it doesn't matter where
yeah. What do you think the elemental? So right here, this is so dishonest. Like there'd be somebody who thinks the elemental particle could possibly be something bigger than a photon. The smallest thing we know in the universe is a fucking photon. It's massless. It's nothing. It's so small. It would be the elemental bit, would be something like a photon. So why are you doing this nonsense of saying this is the elemental particle, this big thing, and we're going to talk about under the elemental particle, these little tiny things moving around under, smaller than the elemental particle. Does that make any sense? No. It's rubbish as an argument. It's an insane straw man. It's not even a straw man. I mean, it's a man, it's an airman. I mean, it's terrible.
Those rogue planets between solar systems, which there are, if it's going to turn, something is causing it to turn.
So now he's comparing objects that are a bazillion times the speed of light cubed, a number of elemental bits in them, and talking about them being bent by forces that are trillions of times smaller bits interacting with them. So bits are trillions of times smaller than the giant planets. He's talking about them moving things. He's talking about the elemental bits moving things and trying to say the planet is the elemental bit and the force moving it is not elemental. I mean, it's a backwards. It's an inside-out close on a clothes stand or something. It's not even a decent straw man. It doesn't even have the proper number of arms. It doesn't have the head in the right place. It has no frickin' penis. It's a silly straw man.
If that's the case, there's a smaller particle out there doing that. And for it to do that, and it's organize itself.
Okay, so again, he's using planets moving as evidence that there has to be smaller particles moving photons. I mean, it's an insane perversion of any argument that's been made ever in the history of mankind. Nobody has made this pathetic argument you're putting in their mouth.
It's got to have smaller particles below that to organize it. And infinitely down. Turtles all the way down. And
bullshit.
Turtles all the way up, which a lot of us
bullshit all the way down. Bullshit.
Doesn't matter. Infinity is there if you want to solve all these problems of the ultimate particle. Things don't.
It doesn't solve problems, it makes problems. So pretend that you've solved some problem with infinity. I don't know what problem you think it solves. The problem of the non-bending photon, I don't think it's going to solve that problem because the non-bending photon isn't a problem.
Organize magically. It can't be infinitely dense then.
So again, infinitely dense, he's talking it's magic. And there's no citation to what he claims to be an actual statement by an actual physicist. He's arguing a complete nonsense, something he made up as their theory, and putting it in their mouth and then mocking it. I mean, this is 101 of fallacy failure. I mean, you can't do this. This is the complete bullshit fallacy. I mean, you just made up a complete bullshit argument.
And what? Everything's infinitely heavy. So, those are things that we need to address in infinity.
Nobody needs to address a silly argument that nobody has made. Nobody's suggesting infinite mass or infinite density. No one.
Helps us out there. Of course, there's an uncomfortable part of infinity, and that is infinitely all the way down. That means there are probably little worlds, infinite little worlds all around us. But the good news is they're in their own space. They're not parallel, whatever the heck that means. I know a lot of my listeners. Yeah,
well, what does that even mean? You're saying it as you now answer. Oh, the good news is they're not parallel. What sense does it even make to bring that up? So you bring up a fallacy of physics, that is multiverses and separate universes and separate dimensions, all a bunch of made up of crap. There's 3 fucking physical dimensions. That's all for dimensions. All done with the dimensions. No more dimensions. That's it. All finished.
Are here because they can't take that either. Parallel universes. Parallel universes touch in those brains. Well, brains. I'm not making this up. They touch and explode.
Yeah, you're making it all up, and you're mocking again an argument made by who? Where can I go see the lecture on the thing you're mocking?
Into the Big Bang, and that's how the Big Bang started. That's one of the ideas.
Yeah, well, obviously anybody who speculates on how the Big Bang started, even you or any of the other cabbage heads that you think have viable theories, they're all out of their I can't remember all these little cliche things. Out of their water, out of their medium, out of their depth. They're all out of their depth. They don't have any professional skill at all. No evidence, no tool, no mechanism whatsoever to third eye themselves a vision of creation. Can't be done. No evidence pointing to it whatsoever. All the evidence suggests is brains don't come from nowhere. So whatever the cause is, a brain didn't cause it.
As I say, shoot me now. So anyways, infinity to the rescue. And also, if we have all that, what happens? You guys are here. One of the things I promised always is to talk about what? New models for particles. What happens now that we have people who are decades and decades outside the mainstream, like you, who are...
I don't even think there is anybody else with a particle model that he mentions as part of his club. They're all ether nuts. Sorry, ether nuts, but you're nuts, okay? Ether is a silly idea.
Are here, who are critical thinkers. Maybe some of you have PhDs in science. Some of you are engineers. Some of you are software engineers like me. Some of you are just love science. Do something else, but you love science. You think about it.
Right. All of you are just as you might be as qualified as the idiots who came up with silly Copenhagen and many worlds and other bullshit and bent space and all that shit. You can be just as qualified as the idiots who got it wrong, or you can be underqualified. Less qualified than those idiots. Either way, obviously being a professional doesn't mean you're not going to come up with something stupid. Einstein was a professional physicist. His idea is three bears bullshit, in my opinion.
And I'm not going to take all this mumbo jumbo. What are the new models telling us? Well, we have new models, particle models. The universe, one of them, you can go look at it. And he is explaining step by step his entire model.
The universe, one of them. So I don't know what he said. I guess maybe he's talking about his father. And I don't want to pick on his father. He's an old guy and all that shit. But his answers to a lot of questions is, I don't know. Maybe. It's just kind of, we're all making it up, but he's kind of making it up in a kind of a general blob kind of way. Yes, maybe it looks like a bear, but it could be a wildebeest. It just kind of depends on what angle you look at it. It's some kind of thing with fur, maybe.
Do something else, but you love science, you think about it. And I'm not going to take all this mumbo jumbo. What are the new models telling us? Well, we have new models, particle models. The universe, one of them, you can go look at it. He is explaining step by step his entire model. If you like the mainstream model, but you want to go from 19...
You know what? He's talking about Jeff Yee here. Now, Jeff calls his theory particles of the universe, but it's an ether theory. They're really not particles in any sense of the word. They're like little beating hearts, little wave centers. They're not particles in any way of thinking about particles as solid things that don't do anything, in the sense that they don't have heartbeats and they don't do all that crap. They might move, they interact in a certain way, but they don't have heartbeats. I mean, come on. His theory is entirely a ether theory. I mean, all the way down, all the way up, all the way around. It's covered in ether. It's smeared in ether. Yeah, I don't like that he's calling it particles of the universe, because he doesn't really think they're particles.
Free variables to just 4 or 5 constants, or variables as well. Simplify the current system. Then Jeff Yee and the Particles of the Universe YouTube channel, subscribe to him.
Right, now his last 2 videos to me were, really difficult to see anything in. They were just derivatives of the mathematics, somehow another mathematical proof of something. Look, I can pervert their equation into my equation, and I'm supposed to somehow go through all that crap and figure out what the trick is. What the little gimmick is. It's probably in there somewhere. No thank you. But I mean, this whole idea of waves that go in straight lines, they don't spread. So a photon is just this going through the ether, and that somehow, if two photons, he doesn't deal with the question either, ether, why photons go right through each other, because waves will often bounce off each other when they're in the medium. But whatever. Continue.
I love his model. It's not my model, because my dad and I have our own model, and I have.
So I mean, this whole idea of I love bullshit, especially right next to especially right next to my not bullshit. I mean, why are you saying I love bullshit? I love bullshit. I love bullshit. I love bullshit. Why are you loving bullshit? I mean, shouldn't we want the right answer and just get done with the bullshit? Shouldn't the mission be what the fucking truth is, not having 17? Well, that's as good as the truth, and that's as good as the truth, and that's as good as the truth. What? I one bad religion or 25 bad religions? I don't want any religions. I don't want any bullshit.
Disagreements about it, but is his model really good and better? Absolutely, 100%. I will.
So he says something like that.
Way
100% better. So more exaggerated, preposterous rhetoric. It's obviously not 100% because you don't think it's right. So why would you say it's 100% better? It has to be something less than 100% better if it's not the right answer. I mean, just this is just again logic 101.
I'll take the mainstream's model. That's one model. Take a look at it. I won't tell you about it. Go subscribe to him.
Yeah, it's right. 3 pigs versus 3 blind mice versus 3 bears. I mean, it's just pick whatever kind of furry creature you like and believe the silly little fable.
Other ones are ether models. Like Dr. Glenn Borker has an ether model. What's an ether model? It says, well, light can't be nothing.
Jeff Yee has an ether model. So again, just you didn't get that one correct.
Nothing. It's waves through something. And what is that? Ether. Oh, ether models have been disproved. Old ether models have been disproved. There are new.
Again, I don't think any ether was disproven. They just couldn't find evidence supporting. There's a difference between proving something can't be right and proving its viability. So what they didn't find was evidence confirming. And it's sort of like the lensing argument. They see the evidence that confirms the theory, they ignore the evidence that doesn't confirm, that is in conflict with the theory. And you can do that with anything. You can just ignore the contrary facts and just pay attention to the ones that support the theory. But clearly, the fact that an interferometer 150 years ago didn't detect ether drag doesn't prove anything, because the alternative theories also haven't demonstrated why don't photons hit photons. It's a really hard question to answer. I don't think there's simple answers.
Ones, and they deal with all the problems of ether. So get over it, mainstream people. Oh, it's done. If you're an etherist, what are you working in? No. And you want to get even farther than that. My father and I were using a particle model. You know what it's based on? Moving mass. That's it.
Yeah, well, whatever. That's saying absolutely nothing. So, bravo. But yeah, fine. Moving mass. Again, if I took everything and just made it the same thing and I moved it as mass, the universe could have no character at all, because nothing would stick to anything else. So again, you can't just say moving mass. There, I've explained physics.
Nothing more. Everything is moving mass. Light is moving mass. Gravity is moving mass. Everything is. And they all work under Newtonian law. The ether under Borker works under Newtonian.
Every one of the crackpot theories, to some extent, has to work under Newtonian law, because Newtonian law are things like the inverse square law. They're things that are happening all around us. Now, yes, they're misunderstood because the law doesn't exist in every location in space, because when you put things really close to each other, the inverse square law breaks down. But generally speaking, Newtonian laws are really solid laws.
Wow. There's not even such thing as charge, because just because you put a plus and minus on something doesn't mean that they come together.
Okay, so again, this argument that somehow it's just an arbitrary thing. They didn't notice a difference between protons and electrons and between the force effects of protons and electrons, and then label them different because they had a different function that was quite obvious. You know, he's just saying they just arbitrarily made a distinction. The distinction isn't arbitrary, it isn't erroneous, it's completely connected to a huge volume of evidence that electrons do one thing and protons do exactly the opposite in certain fields. And so charge isn't some made-up notion. It's a notion based on a ton of frickin' evidence that these two objects are inversely related to each other, the proton and the electron. Christ. I mean, it's just such a straw man.
So the particle model, my father and I, it's based on infinity. It keeps going down. You have gravity particles at level 1. You have gravity particles at level 2. And gravity particles at level 3. Borkert has ether particles at level 1. At below one level of that, ether particles at level 2.
Yeah, I mean, not mocking your father, but I mean, he's speculating that there's something moving the speed of light squared. G3 particles or whatever, G2 particles are moving the speed of light squared. I mean, get real. That's spontaneous action at a distance.
And ether, so he calls them A1, A2, A3. We have G1, G2, G3. We also have A1, 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 A2, A3, but there are atoms. We say they're periodic tables below us. But it's all doesn't have the problem with.
Okay, so none of this idea that you can just reconfigure atoms entirely, that you don't have to pay attention to the periodic table, any kind of notions of weighing these things, any kind of notion of knowing what's moving around inside of them, that you can just abolish all known physics and all known experiments and just remake it all from your own will, from what I think is a pleasant way to draw. I can just reshape animals into any shape I want to. It's all kind of clay, and I don't have to obey any rules at all. That's all you're kind of saying here. You want to go back to Newton and just pretend we haven't learned anything since. No, there's been a ton of stuff learned since Newton, and especially about the composition of atoms and what parts you can do with or without, and whether you can sit there and just say electrons are made of the same thing a photon is made out of, and somehow that's going to make sense to anybody rational, when it can't. They clearly have very different properties. Photons don't clump. Electrons are a clump. Much bigger than a photon.
The ultimate particle. Now, I will say that Jeff Yee does seem to have the ultimate particle, and yes, he's going to suffer with those problems of
I don't know where he comes up with this notion of an ultimate particle when he has something called a wave center, and the ether is the sub-medium. The ether is the smaller bits. So he's clearly not calling it the wave centers, the nucleuses of atoms. He's clearly not saying that's the smallest elemental bit. He's clearly saying the ether transmits the smaller portions of energy throughout the universe. So instead of little particles moving, it's waves in the ether. I would argue that, in some respects, ether theory and particle theory can be unified if people just understand the ether to be little grains of sand or something. If they just granularize their ether, it could, the two theories could be unified.
having to put characteristics on them, but it still doesn't matter. Why? Because he's simplifying the current system. If you were to pick between the two. But like I said,
again, I don't see any simplification. He buys into the whole quark thing and neutrinos and all the bullshit exotic particles. He buys into all that crap. So, and the mathematics is again just a ton of new pieces, deltas all over the place, all kinds of crap that you know, you got to spend a frickin' 2 hours to figure out what the hell the math is even saying. I don't see anything simple.
It's not me, it's not Jeff Yee, it's not Borkert. We're not the ones here to let you, to tell you the truth. I don't want to tell you the truth. I hope you don't believe
You just did it, you asshole. I'm sorry. I mean, I just don't mean to get offensive, but I mean, this is just so rude. That's what you just did. You just mocked ideas. You said these ideas are not possible. You can't have a fucking ultimate particle. You can't do this. You can't do that. Then you say, I'm not doing that. I'm not creating a new religion or saying you can't create a model that is superior to my model or their model. No, I'm not saying that. Except that's exactly what you just did. You're not attacking conventional physics. You're promoting your physics. And those two arguments aren't the same argument.
You know why? Because if you go and look for yourself and look at the data, you're going to say, maybe the data for the Earth expansion is correct. Maybe Jeff Yee's particle model.
Earth expansion. So again, he has this. The theory is that the Earth was a little thing and it got really bigger thing. And their proof of it is there's one of the proofs is that the dinosaurs would have done so much better under less gravity. Yeah, but the problem with that argument is there was a ton of things living with the dinosaurs, okay, like giant dragonflies, 2 feet across wingspan, pterodactyls. None of those things could work at all in a thinner atmosphere. I mean, they would have no hope at all. They need a thick atmosphere. And the way you can have a thick atmosphere is you have to have a lot of gravity to compress the atmosphere. So if you can explain how you can have low gravity and a thick atmosphere with the chemistry we know to exist, a breathable chemistry, we kind of know that dinosaurs probably were doing the oxygen cycle. We know that that's how the oil was created. So we kind of know you have to stay within the hydrocarbon model. So how exactly do you create a dense enough atmosphere for dragonflies to fly in without gravity? I don't think you're going to have much hope.
Of the universe is way better. Yep. Oh, maybe infinity is really important. And yeah, models probably should adopt this because we don't believe in magic. Or if you do adopt it, at least understand.
So that's the rhetoric. So that's the class of his rhetoric, which is the same dismissal regular physics does. So he's guilty of exactly the same crime of them as this preposterous arrogance. You know, where they dismiss everything because they say, well, there's ether drag or there's this kind of thing, blah, blah, blah. Therefore we can just dismiss the idea. We have one piece of evidence indicating it not confirming, therefore we can just dismiss the whole idea. And he's doing exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. I know it's worse because he's creating some preposterous notion that when people say this is the ultimate particle, they really mean that this is a big giant thing and there's other little particles around it, when they never said that.
Things are. Think for yourself. So, now that you know about the ultimate particle, and I've opened some doors for you as to think about it, think about.
Get literate in the evidence. Fuck this thinking for yourself thing. First be literate in the subject, and then think. So first you need literacy in what the evidence actually is. So yes, you have to do some work to acquire knowledge of what is being asserted by conventional physics and at least accurately describe their assertions. That's a minimum before you start ragging on them.
The current system. Think about infinity. Take a look at the models out there. And like I say, don't take anyone's word on faith.
Yeah, well obviously faith is retarded. Faith is belief without evidence. Go seek evidence. Go seek arguments that have evidence in them. Go watch arguments where people make logical constructions, going through all the procedures of, well, this accounts for A, and this is what happens in B, and these are the causes and the effects. And maybe even demand that you get some sort of illustration of how this thing works. Don't let somebody just say magnets are a hyperboloid, and that's why they attract. Force them to give you a little more than that.
faith, you stay critical, you stay thinking. I am Dave D. Hilscher. I am your science therapist, bringing you things that...
No point in being critical, again, if you don't have the competence to critique. You can't be a critic unless you have some sort of knowledge of good and bad science. And clearly most people don't have any of that. Clearly they do just... Feynman said so. Feynman said so. That's all they got. He's my hero. He hit a home run in 1943 Olympics. Some sort of bullshit like that. He's pathetic. So, anyway. But, you know, like I said, I like David, but, you know, we're just really different people. You know, just very different. Same age, you know, from the same era. Lots of things in common. Both do the art thing and all that kind of crap, but both do the programming thing. Like I said, a lot in common, but pointed in just we're anti-particles or whatever. Yeah, pointed in completely different directions. Anyway, so enough. So again, I don't mean to be rude, but I mean I think some of these arguments are rude and pretentious, and I just can't let them lie. I can't just let somebody sit there and say somehow he's provided a logical proof that a particle model that has an elemental particle in it can't explain the universe when, yeah, it can. Alright. No infinities were needed or required. Alright, so that was a experience. Anyway, until next time. There was probably something else I wanted to mention. I did find some new channel, some ether guy. You know, maybe I'll play one of his videos. You know, but that's all there is. They're just a bunch of people with these stupid ether theories. You know, everybody apparently just, they see whatever, something endearing in the chaos of ether, and to me it's obnoxious. It's just that, it's noise. It's a completely unnecessary mush. No need to put the whole friggin' universe in a big bowl of grits. No need at all. No, anyway, till next time, such.